In this video, I would like to present the proposal for a new parsimonious economic well-being indicator, the Inequality-Adjusted Healthy Lifetime Income. And the corresponding paper with the same title was written together with David Bloom from Harvard University, Victoria Fan from the University of Hawaii at Manoa, Vadim Kufenko, who is at the University of Hohenheim, and Osondo Obuchi and Gavin Yamey at Duke University. The motivation for this paper at the starting point is actually the well-known observation that GDP per capita is only of limited use as a measure of economic well-being. And these are no big news. I mean, economists knew that all the time, basically. And even Simon Kuznets, who is kind of credited as the inventor of GDP, already warned against its use as a well-being indicator. Nevertheless, GDP is often criticized, and particularly important in our context are the following two criticisms. Namely, that it doesn't account for negative externalities of production, such as environmental damage and therefore environmental quality, and it disregards important components of individual well-being. So if you ask people what is important in their lives, then they will often reply good health, for example, or distributional fairness. And these two aspects are not captured by per capita GDP. There are lots of other criticisms, but these two are the ones that we would like to address with our contribution. And disregarding these critiques, basically, GDP also has many advantages as compared to other measures and indicators. And that is that GDP is comparatively easy to calculate as compared, for example, happiness indicators, where you need to poll a large fraction of the population and then you get subjective answers and so on and so forth. In case of GDP, you know that it is the value of the goods and services that are produced in a country in a certain period of time. And you can collect this data and compile it comparatively in a comparatively straightforward manner. So it's also available over long periods and for many countries, and its computation does not put a lot of strain on statistical agencies in different countries. And particularly important is the straightforward definition and meaning that allows it to be set in relation to other economic variables, such as, for example, national debt. So if you have national debt and you divide it by GDP, you know the relation of a country's debt in as compared to its economic strength. And this is a measure also how likely it is that a country will repay its debt, for example. Or if you set it in relation to social welfare expenditures of a country, then you know how important social welfare is for the budget of a country, and so on and so forth. You cannot do this for many other well-being indicators. For example, happiness measures. I mean, you can divide national debt by happiness, but it wouldn't be that informative, such a measure. So what we aim to do in our contribution is to propose a measure that preserves the advantages of GDP to the best extent possible, but it includes health and distributional aspects. And by the fact that it includes health, it also includes a certain dimension of environmental quality, or it captures some of the negative externalities that GDP also implies. Now, why is the first aspect important here? Life expectancy. I mean, it's straightforward that people value their health, but even disregarding this effect on well-being, life expectancy is also very important in computing lifetime income. So, for example, if you compare Iceland and Germany in 2013, then Germany had a per capita GDP of 42,900 US dollars approximately. And Iceland had a per capita GDP of 42,370 US dollars. So a superficial conclusion would be, that is based on solely per capita GDP, that the average person in Germany is financially better off than the average person in Iceland in 2013. However, this completely disregards life expectancy and the fact that life expectancy in Iceland was 1.5 years longer than life expectancy in Germany. So this implies that once you compute lifetime income, then the average person in Iceland would actually have a higher lifetime income than the average person in Germany. just by including the expected length of life of a person in Iceland versus the length of life of a person in Germany. A similar argument can be made why inequality should be important over and above the fact that many people might value a more equal distribution of income for its own sake, basically. And that is, again, consider Iceland and Germany. And in 2013, they had a Gini index in Germany of 0.31 and in Iceland of 0.25. Now, the Gini index is a measure of inequality that is closer to 1 if inequality is higher and closer to 0 if inequality is lower. So this means inequality in Germany was higher in 2013 than in Iceland by quite a large amount. 0.06 Gini points is actually a rather large difference. Now, if we consider that income distributions are skewed towards the right, which means that average income is to a large extent driven by outliers, then this means that it might be the case that in Germany, a few people with very high incomes actually push the mean up, while the median would be much lower. And median income is actually what kind of a person would value if she were born into a country without a knowledge of which income she would have over her life cycle. So that's basically the income that a person could expect over the life cycle. So annual median income would actually be higher in Iceland than in Germany with these inequality figures. So these aspects could not be captured when we focus solely on per capita GDP. So what we propose as an alternative, or rather a complementary indicator, is inequality-adjusted healthy lifetime income. And we've defined this for country I, so the index I refers to countries, as the product of its per capita GDP with healthy life expectancy and a measure of inequality, which is 1 minus the Gini coefficient in the country. So what we would have is that the first part here refers to the income a person could expect to have during the time she spends in good health. And then we weigh this down, the higher the inequality level of a country is. So the higher the Gini is, the lower is this third term here, and therefore we weigh down income if inequality is higher. This takes into account that the higher inequality is, the higher is the difference between average income and median income, and median income would be what the person in the middle of the distribution actually cares about. So in contrast to per capita GDP, this measure takes into account a lifetime perspective, not only a yearly perspective. It takes into account health and thereby also the quality of the environment. So if a country pollutes the environment quite a lot, this would have negative effects on healthy life expectancy. So this is captured to some extent. And it takes into account inequality in terms of disposable income, because we use the Gini coefficient in our calculations that refers to the distribution of disposable income. So after taxes, basically, and redistribution. The positive aspects are that, again, the values that come out of this calculation. So this is a number, we can express it in dollar terms, and it can be directly interpreted. And the direct interpretation that it has is that it is the income that a person can expect to earn in a country over the time where she is in good health. And again, there is an easy calculation because it's just multiplication, and there are limited data requirements because the components are usually readily available for the different countries. So it would not put a lot of strain on statistical agencies to compute this inequality-adjusted healthy lifetime income. And when we do it and we compute it for different countries, for example, you can see the results in the European Demographic Data Sheet 2020, then we have a greater sample of countries than we would have when we calculated the Human Development Index or the Inequality-Adjusted Human Development Index actually. So when we use our indicator, we can cover a larger set of countries, and we can also go back in time quite far when we do comparisons across time with this well-being measure. If you compute this well-being indicator for the different countries all over the world, and then you compute a ranking out of that, then there would be some interesting implications for such country rankings. For example, the United States and Saudi Arabia, which would be at the top of rankings that are based on per capita GDP, would move down in the ranking despite their high per capita GDP levels. And the reason is that in these countries, healthy life expectancy is comparatively low, and these countries also exhibit a high inequality level. So basically, these two aspects would imply that these two countries move down the league table. And by contrast, certain European countries would move up despite having a comparatively low per capita GDP. And these would be countries with rather low levels of inequality and a rather high healthy life expectancy. For example, Denmark, Sweden, Austria, Belgium, and Finland. And basically, one could argue that these adjustments reflect aspects that are typically important in well-being considerations, namely health and lower inequality. One important aspect to know is whether the indicator leads to reasonable results. So what we can do here is to compare it with the results based on other well-being indicators that are reasonable, such as the Human Development Index. And we've done this here for, we computed two country rankings, one based on our Inequality-Adjusted Healthy Lifetime Income, and another one based on the Inequality-Adjusted Human Development Index. And for this comparison, we had to restrict the sample to those countries that are captured by the Human Development Index. So our indicator would be available for more countries. But when we do this, the countries for which both of these indicators provide results, for those countries, the Spearman correlation of the rankings is 0.95. So in general, the rankings are very much in line with each other. But then the question might emerge why we need an additional indicator at all when it correlates highly with the country rankings that are the outcome of the Human Development Index and the Inequality-Adjusted Human Development Index. Well, and here I think our indicator has many additional advantages. For example, it can be interpreted directly and is therefore useful for economic calculations. So the outcome of our indicator is a dollar value that we can set in relation to other economic outcomes. For example, the debt level of a country, social welfare spending, and so on and so forth. And you cannot do this with the Human Development Index or the Inequality-Adjusted Human Development Index, which do not have a meaning as such. Then what's also important is that the Human Development Index and Inequality-Adjusted Human Development Index are bounded from above, so they cannot be higher than 1. However, development of different countries is ongoing, so incomes still increase, life expectancy increases, and so on and so forth, and that leads to a situation where actually many countries start to cluster at high levels of the HDI and the Inequality-Adjusted HDI, and you cannot really compare them anymore in a meaningful way. So what does it mean that one country has 0.01 higher Human Development Index than the other one? In our case, we can make these comparisons quite easily because in our case the indicator is allowed to grow further and it still has the implication of Inequality-Adjusted Healthy Lifetime Income, so the income that a person can expect to earn over the time where she is in good health. So the increases can still be interpreted in a straightforward manner. It's easy to calculate again, and it does not depend on arbitrary weighting of sub-indices, so where we kind of aggregate indices of subcomponents such as aspects related to education and health, but in our case the weights follow directly by the interpretation of the number. So it's kind of like a definition, like when you have the speed of a car and you multiply it with the time that you drive with the car, then you get the distance that is traveled. And it's the same with our inequality adjusted healthy lifetime income. So if you multiply income with life expectancy, then you get lifetime income by definition. And finally, it's available for more countries and longer time periods than the other measures. And that's particularly important if you want to make cross-country comparisons and comparisons over time of how countries have developed. Another advantage is that we can compute different versions of inequality adjusted healthy lifetime income to address different criticisms. For example, here we would have another option that addresses critiques with respect to commuting. So for example, with small countries, it might be the case that many people from the outside commute into these countries and generate income there, but in the evening they commute home again and actually spend their income somewhere else. Then we could compute inequality adjusted healthy lifetime income not based on per capita GDP, but on per capita gross national income, which takes into account these commutes basically. So in this case, the lifetime income of small countries would be weighed down due to these commuting effects. So we could address this criticism by adjusting the calculation accordingly. A second option would be to compute not inequality adjusted healthy lifetime income, but inequality adjusted lifetime income based on life expectancy instead of healthy life expectancy. That would address critiques with respect to data availability, because healthy life expectancy is also an indicator that has to be computed based on different underlying data, and it is not available for long time periods and so on and so forth. But life expectancy usually is, and also available for all countries in the world basically. So in this case, we would substitute healthy life expectancy by life expectancy and could then compute the corresponding measure for more countries and even longer time periods. And then the interpretation would change slightly, so it would not be inequality adjusted healthy lifetime income, but inequality adjusted lifetime income. So to summarize, what we believe is that inequality adjusted healthy lifetime income preserves many of the advantages of per capita GDP, but nevertheless it includes also other aspects that are typically regarded as important in the debate on measuring well-being. That is life expectancy, health and environmental quality, and aspects related to inequality. And the bottom line is that it would be a pragmatic well-being indicator that improves upon existing ones, but of course it should not substitute for them, but be seen as a complementary measure. Thank you very much for your attention.